Good evening, people who are listening and or watching. We've been gone for a month. It has been a full month since you had your weekly helping of two guys, one car. I am David, aka Curly.
Yeah.
That would be Tom, who is now a well-traveled man. And yeah, we're back. We've been on a bit of a break, but we're back and we've got some fun stuff to talk about. Normally we would broadcast the morning, but instead we're broadcasting at beer o'clock. And I just spilled beer on my tablet. That went well.
Other
Anyway.
than seeing my window, I don't think the audience is gonna know what time it is. Let's be honest here.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. It's after 5 o'clock here. Therefore, it's beer o'clock. Anyway, let's get into what we're going to talk about today. I think the biggest piece of news is the new Corvette. It's been released. It's official. Tom and I already knew about it. We've both actually seen this car pre-release. Tom has actually driven the thing. So we're going to talk about the C8 Corvette. We're also going to talk about China.
China.
That'll probably be a bit of a short topic, talking about tariffs and how they're going to affect your cars. Kind of more on the same topic, emissions, mostly CARB versus MAGA. Who's going to win that battle? Maybe we'll talk about Uber, I guess. Oh, and then racing. We're doing a double racing topic this week. I'm super excited. First is Formula One, because Formula One has been awesome for the last 4 races. And McLaren made a huge announcement. They are returning to IndyCar next year in a partnership with Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports, and that is Schmidt-Peterson, not Smith-Peterson, as certain publications you should really know better have said it. So let's scroll back to the top and let's talk about probably what's going to be the most important car released this year, and that is the Corvette C8-12C. And I'm going to jump into that part of the topic first, which is, what the hell, GM? This is a supercar. Why did you make it look like a squashed Malibu? What the crap?
Okay. I'm sick
And the
of
Malibu already looks like a squashed car.
Malibu comparisons. God damn it! It does not look like a Malibu. Nothing
like how-
like a Malibu except for a Cruise and a Malibu, and the Cruise doesn't exist anymore. Nothing looks like the Malibu. It's
We're 30
different.
seconds into this and I've already triggered Tom. This is going to go well.
They did it with the SS. They did it with the Camaro. Neither of those looked like Malibus.
So I guess my complaint here is that it's not even the face. Like, okay, fine, it's a corporate face. I don't care. Lexus did the same thing with the LFA, and that looked pretty good. It's everything else. Like, there's just nothing. Like, a supercar should be sitting still. It should look exciting. That has always been the calling card of Ferrari and Lamborghini. And, I actually like the C7's styling. It's more aggressive than I like, but the Corvette's also an aggressive car. And my disappointment here is that the C7 is a really aggressive looking sports car, but you put it next to a C8 and the C8 just looks bland and boring in comparison. So it's like you've got really good Corvette on one side and kind of like technically amazing nerdy Corvette. Like it went from a jock to a nerd.
I'm really not sure where you're getting boring. It's more aggressive looking than the C7 has ever been, even the ZR1. The ZR1 was the only aggressive looking C7. It's been a progression from the soft and gentle curved bubble that was the C5 to the somewhat more interesting C6, which I think looks beautiful, to the weird angular C7, to now, sanding those angles down and looking more mean in the C8. I really don't get where you're saying boring and where you're getting the C7 as aggressive. Go look up anything that's not a Z06 GS or a ZR1. It looks kind of boring, except for this angry Russian rear end. They got rid of the angry Russian rear end.
I guess I just would have expected more, because again, it is, the the Vet has moved out of GT territory into supercar territory. And part of the reason you buy a supercar is how it looks. And I think, I guess more so when you put that next to a 458 or whatever the current McLaren is, the 720S, I think both of those they just look cooler. The Corvette just looks, compared to its competition, the only car that I think the Corvette is not as boring as is the Huracan, because the Huracan is a pathetic attempt at a supercar.
Okay, so let's talk about that competition, and we're gonna bring up my biggest point about this car right now because you're transitioning very well into it. A lot of the reasoning why it looks the way it does, why it functions the way it does, why some of these parts get carried over is for the reason that everybody was super concerned about up until the
Price.
point of release: price. This
And
thing
I have
costs
to
60
say,
grand. Its
I'm
competition is not
amazed.
Ferrari.
I really thought it was going to be at least twice that. And I seriously mean this. That is an impressive price. Way to go, GM.
It is, and I know why. I know why it is the way it is, and a part of it is the way it looks. And you got to think you talk about competition like we're talking the McLarens and the
Mm.
Ferraris. Sure, in performance, yeah, the Corvette's always been punching with them, even when it was front engine. But that's not its price class. Its price class is the Cayman. It's a low class 911. And guess what? Those two look pretty boring. So
I would argue that the Cayman is boring looking. I guess the base model is kind of, and also to be fair to Corvette, they've intentionally left a lot of room to make the Z06 and the ZR1 awesome. And I think that's when that car will really come into its own, is when you get the more aggressive, higher downforce, the super sporty versions. I'm sure that's when that car is really going to astound. And again, the way I kind of look at it is it's turned itself into sort of a nerdy sports car instead of, you know, this, sort of jock ripped, you know, the older Corvettes were very much muscle cars kind of turned up very aggressively, kind of on steroids to a point. Whereas this car, I feel like, is a lot more, it's really made a huge leap into the future. And I love that. I think that's great. Um, I don't know.
the
I
problem
guess,
though is I really think the price was a problem here. And this was a car that couldn't win. It was either going to be cheap like it is, and people would complain about boring styling or that they might have to do for practicality or for other reasons or to keep costs down, or they make it bespoke and interesting and a real supercar like you're saying, but then it would be closing in on Ford GT prices and everyone would be pissed. There was not going to be universal love with this. But
oh, there was never going to be universal love. And
but it's a
that,
win, and GM needs a
oh,
win right now.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you and I are sitting here arguing about styling, and that's the only thing about the Corvette we're arguing about, GM did a goddamn good job. Like, I know styling is important for supercar buyers, but at least for or sports car buyers in general, styling is important. But if I'm picking a sports car, styling is part of it, but it's below dynamics and how it makes me feel. And can I afford the thing? Can I? And you know what? That's actually one of the biggest advantages that the Corvette will have over any of its competition is no matter what town you are in, you will be able to get that car serviced because it's a Chevrolet. Every town, the tiny little town I work in, that is literally like 8 city blocks in size, has a Chevy dealership in it. It is the only dealership in town, and it's a Chevy dealership.
But you also happen to live near where the Corvette is built, and let's not forget you do have to get Corvette certified, and
True.
that's only a few of the Chevy dealers.
This is true, but if you compare the Chevy dealer network or even the Corvette dealer network compared to even just Porsche's dealer network, that is a huge advantage for someone who wants to buy a sports car. You can literally take that car anywhere in the United States and you'll be within I'll say 2 hours of a dealership that can work on your mid-engine Corvette. You cannot say the same thing about any of the other mid-engine cars out there. So that is, again, you're right. This is a huge win for GM. I do think this is going to be a good car. I guess aside from the styling, my biggest complaint, and it's the one that I know you're waiting for, is I don't understand why this is a Corvette. And I realized that Zora Duntov, and I've been to the Corvette Museum. I even saw the sinkhole, by the way. That's how long ago it was. I realized that even the Corvette's creator wanted it to be mid-engine. I've seen the concepts, which looked awesome. But, and this was just pure coincidence, but I think it was there for a reason. Thank you, car gods. Recently, I was watching an old Top Gear episode, and they were reviewing the C6 Corvettes. Hammond specifically reviewed it. And he said something that I thought at the time was very poignant. He said, the Corvette is America's Porsche 911. It's a simple formula. It hasn't changed. You've got an engine in front, the driver in the middle, and rear-wheel drive at the back. And Porsche tried the same experiment with the 911. They wanted to replace the 911 with the 928. And 911 fans complained so much they brought the 911 back, and the 928 has been out of production for almost 30 years. And I don't think the same thing's going to happen with the Corvette. The fact that the 2020 Corvette is already sold out, I think speaks to the fan reaction of this car. For me, I would have actually preferred to see them take this car, move it a little more up market, and sort of leave the Corvette alone. But with what they've done with the car, I feel like that's still kind of a minor complaint. If you're complaining about history versus progress, yeah, progress wins. That's just how it always is.
All right. I'm not going to yell at you.
That's right, because
I
I have the ability to mute you, by the way.
but I am going to call you on the America's 911 thing because I think Hammond is absolutely wrong in a
What do you
certain
think
way.
America's 911 is? Or I
So
guess
I think
story.
the attitudes of these two vehicles are completely different. Porsche 911 fans are obsessed that this rear engine layout is the perfect way to design a car. They love the lift-off oversteer that it brings. They love the weird quirks that it has. Front engine rear-wheel drive does not have those quirks. To the fans that buy this car, that love this car, we have been enduring decades of rumors, decades of speculation, decades of excitement for this car, for this mid-engine change. Porsche fans never wanted a mid-engine 911. They never wanted a front-engine 911. That's why the 928 got rejected. People have wanted a mid-engine Corvette for decades. This is not something that has been met with resistance. So I don't see the problem in moving the engine to the rear. They've already tried front mid-engine. That was great. This layout has changed. The Corvette has changed a lot over the years. I would recommend going through Everyday Driver's movie on the Corvette history because that's really cool to see one after the other, see the progression of the Corvette. It's
Way to
changed
plug
a
a
lot.
show that will never plug us back, by the way.
I don't care. It's cool. It's a cool movie. It's really cool. But
And to that point, as much as 911 haters like to say, oh, the 911 hasn't changed ever since it came out. It's just Jeremy Clarkson's favorite line is, oh, it's just a fast Beetle. It's changed a lot too,
it
in very
has.
significant ways, but there's still certain parts of it that have not changed. And again, that's just where, yeah, I agree. Clearly I'm in the minority here. Like I said, 2020 Corvette has already sold out. Clearly I am wrong. I am not on the right side of history here. I just think that there was room in Chevrolet's current lineup for a front engine GT sports car and a mid engine sports to supercar. I think there is room for both of them. So that's kind of my complaint is there was an opportunity to have both of these cars, and GM decided on one or the other. And I do realize there are a lot of nerdy, ridiculous business reasons for that.
Yeah,
But I'm going to
there are
stand
some
on my
executives.
heart here and on my beer as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, you now know what I have to deal with every day. Curly loves his layouts. He wants his layouts to stay exactly the same no matter what. This is Curly.
Absolutely.
But I will say though, I believe this is public knowledge that the GM has refused to build a hot hatch because it will siphon Camaro sales. You think they're going to keep a Corvette around and make a mid-engine Corvette? It'll siphon Corvette sales.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, to be honest, that's just a GM problem, because you can look at it like GM does and say, oh, well, if we build this one car, it's going to siphon sales from the other car. Or you can look at it like BMW and say, or we'll just siphon sales from somebody else because they already built a car like that and we're going to build our own version of it. And let's be honest here, the only reason a hot hatch would siphon sales from the Camaro is because the Camaro's trunk opening is abysmal.
There are more reasons I traded my car in.
And what did you get when you replaced your Camaro?
I got a hot hatch, but not a GM hot hatch
Exactly.
because they didn't build one.
But what's funny is for a while you also had a GM hatch along with your Camaro.
Yeah, I just wanted a hatch that was better in every way.
This is true. And you also wanted a winter car that could actually take you through winter without you feeling like you were going to die or get stranded
Or want to kill myself.
or all of the above. So
I
again,
w-
I
so
actually I do like the Corvette. I don't want to sound like I am anti C8. I think it's, like I said, I think it's a nerdy car. I've seen it in person, up on the lift. I'm amazed GM let me out after the number of Corvettes I saw and the condition I saw them in. So this by the way might be the last time you ever see me, because someone at GM is going to see this and I'm going to be assassinated or something. But I do really like the car.
we are glossing over though the biggest change in Corvette besides the layout that you love so much,
No
the
leaf
trans
springs.
the transmission.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that. But you know what? See, the reason I forgot about that is because like 80% of Camaros are already sold with an automatic. Like,
Corvettes.
yeah, that car, the one where we've been talking about the entire time. 80% of Corvettes are sold with an automatic already. Like, at least this is an automatic that's good.
Really good. It's really good.
Again, this is someone who has actually driven the C8 Corvette. And we're not going to go into the nitty gritty about it because Tom has already told me he won't do that. But as he's already said, it's really, really good.
Like the I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the Corvette automatic, if you keep it in automatic mode in the C7 generation, it's fine. It's not spectacular, but if you put it in manual mode and try to have fun in the Corvette automatic, it's dull. It's trash. It's it's a garbage transmission. If you try to hit the paddle anywhere relatively close to redline, you will redline and you'll look like an idiot on the racetrack because they'll just redline like a moron car and not shift. It's slow. You have to plan for like a second or two delay between pulling that paddle and getting your shift. It's fine if it's left to do what it's supposed to do, but if you try to have fun in an automatic, which you can do with a dual clutch, you can always do that. If you try to do that in an automatic, it just falls apart, and I'm glad they put a dual clutch in it.
So am I. It's, again, progress. It is progress. And of course, the biggest reason is that, or the biggest reason they went with the DCT is that there is not a, or I guess GM didn't have an off the shelf mid engine or transverse or whatever. They didn't have a transmission that would have easily adapted to the new layouts. That's clearly why they did this.
And that's also why they didn't make a manual.
Well, that's why they didn't, because they didn't have one available, and it was cost prohibitive to develop one. So okay, we can, if you're going to develop a transmission for the car, make the one that will satisfy as many people as possible. In this case, it was a DCT. So, that was a smart decision. And I've driven manuals, I've driven DCTs. DCTs are really good right now. I
They're fun.
mean, yeah, they are. They are fun, and it's going to make you go faster. And if you really desperately want a manual Corvette, you can get a really screaming deal on one right now.
Grand sport, grand sport, grand sport.
Yes. Yeah, so the type of people who are complaining about not having a manual are kind of like me. And guess what? Tons of manual Corvettes out there. Go ahead and buy one. And I say this as someone who didn't buy a Corvette. I bought a 25-year-old Japanese Roadster so I could have my manual, no ABS, no traction control, no airbag, total death trap weekend car.
But you can't go 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds, bro.
No, I cannot.
What
On the
can you
other
do in 3
hand, I will
seconds?
have just as many people ask me about my Suzuki Cappuccino as would ask the person next to me in their C8 Corvette. I have genuinely never had so many people ask me about a car. I've had more people ask me about the Cappuccino than every other car I've ever been in combined. it's I'm not even kidding. It is crazy how many people think that car is cool.
And they won't all be middle-aged dudes like the guys that are going to be commenting on Corvettes.
Absolutely. I've actually had girls say this is a really cool car.
I've had people
That's
say
like the only sports car in the world you could probably pick up girls in.
Miata.
Second, yes. That's the one for people who are less weird.
Anyway, there's
So
no good transition to this next topic, is
no,
there?
there's really not. Other than if you're going to talk about living in the past and refusing to move in the future, and unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about our
And
one.
awkwardly picking up girls.
This is very true. Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have to start talking about uh, tariffs. So,
Whoa. We're talking more about the auto market here, not tariffs. We've exhausted tariffs.
well, I guess in this case, because there was recent tariffs that um, are certainly going to put a wrinkle in things. So, there's a couple of different ways to look at, I guess, the Chinese American economy and the interaction between the two. I was specifically looking at, we've announced a new set of tariffs, 10% on all consumer goods, including iPhones, which I know that's going to upset a lot of people who are still going to buy their iPhone anyway. But I was looking at more how that kind of how is that going to affect the auto industry, because it's not a direct effect. Like, it's not like, we don't buy Chinese cars. We don't buy Chinese made cars yet. I think that will change eventually, but right now we don't buy Chinese made cars. But their economic slowdown, if it's caused by us, will also affect. Well, any Chinese economic slowdown is going to affect the United States. And right now, China is, especially for the U.S. companies like GM, China is their fastest growing market, and if that market is slowing, that's going to start affecting what we see over here.
And
That's
it
the way
is
I was kind
slowing.
of looking at it.
It's slowing greatly. And
Yes.
it's a lot of that is just a factor of China was a growing market, and this happens when with growing markets that eventually they plateau. That's going to happen. Growth is going to slow down eventually when you have a rapidly growing market. Like the cars aren't dying in 2 years so that the Chinese car buyer is going to go right back out and buy another car. Like it's a lot of these automakers put a lot of investment into China, believing that these people genuinely had the belief that this market was going to keep growing forever and ever, and it hasn't. And that's going to be a major problem because that's a huge chunk of GM's profits right now. That's a huge chunk of uh, Ford's profits, of Volkswagen, maybe not Volkswagen, but like BMW, a lot of the German manufacturers. It's a big deal, and these tariffs certainly aren't helping, and they're not going to continue to help all the parts that we buy from China.
Tease something China.
Okay.
Something about China, and we were talking about the economy just slowing in general because it's been a fast-growing economy.
Yes. And we're live.
Yay!
Curly's
um,
back from the frozen dead.
yeah, Tom's decided he's wanted to try to switch things up, and it's causing issues. Anyway,
I didn't decide that. YouTube decided it.
oh really? Huh.
YouTube ended support of Hangouts. And welcome to Technical Hour.
It has nothing to do with cars, but it's still important for the show. Okay, so thanks Google for abandoning your own app, you bastards. All right,
So the
so I guess with the
China's economy, it's slowing,
yeah,
which is bad.
it's bad. It's definitely not good for us. The fact that our wonderful, illustrious, handsome girl picking up president um, thinks that tariffs will somehow fix it is just making it worse. And you know, I think everyone's on the lookout for a global recession, whether it's by something that America does or it's just a general, um,
Slow down.
yeah, like correction of growth because the world economy has been growing for nothing but 10 years, and you know, at some point that does have to end or at least plateau. But you know, at what point do you? Well, no. There's going to be a plateau, but if we get into a recession, it's likely because of something that we do that's stupid, or China does that's stupid, which I don't think will be the case, but it could be the case, or Brexit. It's
We
going to be one
got
of those three at
well,
this
we got a
point.
long list of American stupid and a growing list of England stupid. So let's
Yep.
let's let's see what causes the crash first.
I think what we're getting at is that white people are going to screw up the economy again.
Shocker. Or orange people.
Yeah. So, and again, this isn't really affecting cars now, but it will definitely affect them in the future
I
because,
mean, it's
again,
kind of
what
affecting cars now because GM, Ford, and others are officially no longer are their profits are dropping drastically, and that's bad right now.
yeah, that's definitely not good. It is, and that's affecting, you know, what are they developing? What are they working on? I mean, there was what was it? A body on frame SUV that GM was working on is supposed to be a Wrangler competitor, and they abandoned it because they didn't want to, or they were worried about the development cost, and they wanted to put that money elsewhere. So, yeah, the
I'm gonna bury
quote,
my
and I'm
sadness
air
here.
quotes here, the proper Blazer, because the Blazer's fine. The proper Blazer got killed because of economy concerns. We don't need to go any further into that than we just did.
Way to stir the pot with the air quotes there.
Because that's what everyone thinks. Oh, it's not body on frame. Whatever. It's the Blazer's been dead.
You know what it is body on frame though? Vehicles that put out a lot of emissions.
Yeah,
Big
and
way.
also more about Trump. Ugh. So there's an ongoing battle that so our last president, who was actually handsome and good with women and people in general, and like understanding things, um, you know, so under Obama, the EPA tightened fuel economy regulations and emissions regulations, which kind of go hand in hand. And Trump ran on a platform of, oh, I'm going to turn those back. And California, since they have their own emissions board, has said, no, we're going to stick with those. And for what I think is the first time in history, the OEMs agree. They're going to stick with what California does, and they're going to ignore what the federal government is doing.
Well, the federal government, for some reason, still hasn't done what they say they're going to do, mostly because basically everybody disagrees with them. Nobody wants the EPA regulations, especially with cars, to be rolled back. The automakers do not want to re-engineer all their cars just for someone to roll in 2020 and change everything back to the way it was. So a lot of us are, a lot of them just want everything to be normal, and California is one of, I believe, 12 states in sort of the CARB battle against Trump and removing these restrictions. And this battle is continuing, and it's I I don't get it. I don't get why Trump is trying to force this. I don't understand why they're still trying to do this. No automaker agrees with it. No one thinks it's a good idea or profitable. They've
Oh,
all
I can
one
tell
by
you
one told
exactly
him.
why. Because his campaign wasn't bankrolled by the automakers; it was bankrolled by fossil fuel companies, and they want us to burn more gas. Simple as that. Always comes down to the money. So and I guess also in his brain, he made a promise. He wants to try to keep it, and it's also anti-Obama because we all know he hates Obama. So, okay, Obama did a thing. I'm going to undo that thing because I can undo that thing. And it doesn't matter if it's actually a good thing that he did, he's still going to try to undo it.
The ironic part about that is a lot of the things California is fighting for were instituted under one of my favorite politicians, Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Arnold.
the governor.
By the way, fun fact, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a relatively progressive Republican. He also advocated for a wall. Seriously, that is a true fact. You can look it up.
He has a much
Arnold,
smaller border than the rest of the entire country, though.
yeah, but it's just kind of funny that the wall, and I know we've really gotten off of cars right now, but the wall was not even Trump's idea. He got it from Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's just,
Well, technically, they
it's,
both got it from China.
yeah, yeah. And from England too, because, they built walls around their castles. Anyway, yeah,
So what you're saying is we should build a moat with sharks.
what do you think the Rio Grande is? Just
Fair
need more
enough.
crocodile. We just need more crocodiles. We can get them from Florida. Like these are easily solvable
Whoa,
problems.
whoa, they need those crocodiles, all right? How will we get crazy news stories without those crocodiles?
Oh, we don't need crocodiles to get crazy news stories out of Florida. They're just going to continue to make those. Okay, let's get back onto cars. We'll
Got
talk
anything more
about
to say about
Uber.
carbs?
We'll talk about Uber. I enjoy my carbs. I'm drinking a beer as we're doing this. This is my second of the night. So if I'm like a little, less coherent than normal, that's why.
I've
By the way,
got
local
water in a bottle.
brewery, West Six from Lexington. Good stuff.
Way to way to plug a thing that won't plug us back, Curly.
I could talk to them. Who knows? They're literally a block away from my garage. I'm sure we can work something out. Okay, so Uber. Um, my only note here is who gives a crap. So I'm gonna let Tom sort of take this one. Uber versus Lyft. What
It's
are your thoughts on this?
it's not just Uber versus Lyft. It's the fact that both of them are finally starting to lose venture capitalist confidence, and it's because they've spent years and years not being profitable. It's a shock to some people for some reason, but Uber and Lyft were, in my belief, intended to be, what do you call them? They're disturbances. They came in here to disruptors. They came in here to disrupt the established order, and they did that. Taxi companies still haven't responded in kind, but the problem with Uber and Lyft right now, they're not making money. They're not going to make money under this current business model. They're really trying to push autonomous. They're throwing a lot of money at it that they don't have, that they're getting
See,
from
now
venture
you've
capitalists
officially picked my interest now. So you just said, Uber and Lyft are not currently making money.
and not going to with their current business model.
And what I was going to get into that is it even possible for them to make money? Because we assume that when autonomous cars come, okay, you get rid of the driver expense, but you still have a very large vehicle expense because I think the unsaid thing about autonomy is it is very expensive. I mean, the autonomy where you don't need a driver, period, is going to be incredibly expensive. It's just going to happen. All that computing power, all of that hardware, all the software development, none of that is free. All of the software, or not the software, all the sensors needed to read all the things on the road, none of that is cheap. Um, we are literally putting supercomputers in cars. Supercomputers are not cheap, especially if you're trying to cram them into a package small enough to fit into a car. So these vehicles are going to be expensive. They are going to require a good amount of maintenance. So they're going to be driving like taxis, 500,000 miles in their lifetime, which is under 10 years. You know, at this point, Uber and Lyft are paying their drivers, but they're not paying for the vehicle costs. But when you go to autonomous, those companies are going to have to buy the cars. They're going to have to maintain them, and that's going to be its own separate set of expenses. So really, the question becomes: can those companies ever become profitable? Because you're now exchanging one set of expenses for another. Autonomous cars just aren't free.
And one of the biggest problems with Uber and Lyft right now is their rides are too cheap. They've kept that price very low for a very long time, and it's already unsustainable with humans. Now you're adding in, like you said, the average cost, the cost of maintenance, the cost of buying these
or
very
just
expensive supercomputers.
or just like gas and electricity. There's something is going to have to make these vehicles move, and Uber and Lyft will have to buy that, whether it's gasoline to put into a car or plugging it into a wall and letting it charge. Someone has to pay for that, and that someone's going to be Lyft and Uber.
And then Uber and
Almost said
the
Luber, by the way.
Luber. That'd be a great name if they ever decide to merge. But
And of course, everyone will have to respond with phrasing.
but Uber also tries to make money by expanding into other markets. They've tried food delivery, which I think they learned very quickly is not that profitable for them as a management company. They're managing the rides. The drivers are the ones getting the tips. So what are they going for here? It's one of those companies that hangs around thanks to venture capitalist money. And what's going to happen to them when that money runs out? At least with all the crap that people give Tesla, Tesla was able to sustain and is able to sustain themselves without free of venture capitalist money. Uber and Lyft I don't think are ever going to get to that point.
And I think you're right. I think everyone, or at least their shareholders, are hoping that those companies can become profitable when they get rid of the humans, which, by the way, terrible capitalism. You're horrible people. But I don't think they're ever going to make it there because they're going to be, again, trading one set of expenses for another. And this is where I'm going to specifically avoid going into a long dissertation on some of the complexities of autonomous cars because I am working on them. But the at that point, you really have to treat these companies not as tech companies but as taxi companies, because now, right now, Uber and Lyft don't own the vehicles. They just pay their contracted drivers who are supposed to be maintaining their vehicles. By the way, huge oversight. I got into a comment war about um the fact that Uber and Lyft drivers, their maintenance or their maintenance scheduling is not something that is part of their business models. And you could be hopping into a car that hasn't had an alignment or hasn't had ball joints in 120,000 miles, and you don't know how safe the vehicle is when you get into it. And the response to that is, oh well, if you don't like the car, then just don't leave them a 5-star review. And it's like, it's kind of hard to leave a review if you're in the hospital because you were in a car accident because the suspension broke. Like, that is not a preventative that is a reactive measure, not a proactive measure. And these vehicles are going to have to be, autonomous vehicles are going to have to be maintained by the owner, which is going to be some giant company who's going to want to do that as little as possible because that costs money. So current taxis, for all of their faults, are regulated every X number of miles. And I don't know because I don't know much about the taxi cab industry, but every X number of miles, those cars have to be maintained and serviced and inspected. And even though they may be gross inside, the actual car is very safe because by law, in order to get your taxi cab medallion, you have to follow a certain set of regulations. One of those being you have to service the car constantly because it drives all the time.
You don't like getting into a Camry with a Christmas tree dashboard.
Christmas tree dashboard's okay. I'd much rather not get into any car that looks like it's got racing slicks when clearly it should not have racing slicks. But that's
still grinding in the turn. It's fine.
I mean, I've seen, I live in a state with no inspection. I mean, there was a car I walked by in my parking lot. It was a Honda Civic with no, I'm sorry, it was not. It was at the Kroger. Sorry, my apartment neighbors. It was in the Kroger. It had no front bumper, no rear bumper, and the trunk was literally duct taped shut. Actually, no, rubber banded. It was a giant rubber band that went around the entire trunk to keep it closed.
Did it
That
have
could
Michigan
be
plates?
No, it was Kentucky because Kentucky doesn't have an inspection.
Because I'm pretty sure I saw that same car in Michigan, which also didn't have inspection.
Yeah, so I don't think either of these companies are going to stay profitable. And I think that's one of the reasons that taxi cab companies have not felt the need to adapt, because they know that as much as these companies are disruptors, they may not be permanent. They're here for, short-term capital gain. But, taxi cab company, that business model is really sound. I mean, that is a business model that they've developed for 100 years, and it has worked really well. So,
I know.
maybe in their opinion, they just need to weather the storm.
Look, man, I know New York has kind of done it. The app isn't great, but it exists. Oh, actually, you can just do it online. It's not an actual app. But even London, with the powerhouse London with the black cabs, have learned that the people want change, and they have adapted and made a London black cab app, which, by the way, it rhymes, so it sounds hilarious. But even they have realized that they need to make this more intuitive. And if taxis want to do more business, they will evolve. They should evolve. And if they don't, then they're messing up.
I agree with that, but again, if those companies know they're going to be around, if that business model is going to work into the future, and we're both sitting here saying we don't think the Uber and Lyft model will, why change if you know you're gonna win the war? Like, okay, I'm gonna lose this battle, but I'm gonna win the war because I'm gonna be a company that's gonna be around. And I'm not trying to defend taxi cab companies. I literally downloaded an app because I literally downloaded the Lyft app because my last taxi experience was so terrible. I was so fed up with it. I needed to get somewhere. I made a reservation for a cab, and they completely abandoned me. And within 5 minutes, I had a Lyft. So, I mean, I am someone who is pissed off at cab companies because they burned me, and yet I'm saying that they don't seem to have much of an incentive to change because,
I
at this
think they
point,
do have an
they're
incentive
still
to change.
winning.
They're winning, but do you want to survive or do you want to succeed? Do you want to get better or do you want to be complacent? It's not that hard to get someone to develop an app. It's literally just paying one guy. Uber probably pays one or two guys. You can pay a dude in his basement to program and maintain an app for you.
A 400-pound dude in his mom's basement.
Exactly. This is all you need. This is not difficult.
And, it's not just the app. It's the, again, a personal vehicle is one that is being taken care of by the owner, hopefully very well. the last taxi cab I was in was admittedly kind of gross. I really didn't want to put my bags in there. So I think what it's going to end up coming down to is at some point, you're going to have to take the best from these ride sharing companies and the best from taxi cabs and mush them together. The convenience, the technology, the pricing of a rideshare app, and the regulation of a taxi cab company. When those two merge, that's, I think, what we're going to come down to. Or we can just be smart and actually invest in public transit and not have to deal with any of this bull crap.
You mean like they have in Deutschland?
Yes, and that is a perfect segue, and I'm actually going to start this out with. So one of the reasons we were out for an entire month, first of all, I went on a vacation, and then Tom spent 2 weeks in Germany. And Tom, I have to ask you, how have you not killed yourself yet? Because if I had the chance to go to Germany during the weekend of the German Grand Prix, and I missed it, and then found out that was the best German Grand Prix ever, I would have probably killed myself. So how are you still sitting here alive?
Well, because I have a house, because I set up the settlement on the day after I flew, making going to the German Grand Prix
But
impossible. And by the way, I do have a bone to pick with the German public transit because it won't take me to the middle of nowhere where Hockenheim is. Well, it'll take me there, but it won't take me back. And that was
by
a
the,
problem.
by the way, welcome to the problems in Kentucky. this is
Except
this
with
is
public
the
transit.
same problem I have. So we're talking about Formula One. This is going to actually be a double motorsports topic because we've been off for a long time. So when we last had an episode, the last race, and I think we actually had to abruptly end the show so we could watch the race, was the French Grand Prix. That was a mistake because the French Grand Prix was boring as hell. Lewis Hamilton led everything. I think the only lap he didn't lead was the lap he pitted. So boring race. Mercedes ran away with it. Hamilton was never challenged for it. And the only thing anybody was talking about were the post-race penalties for Daniel Ricciardo for admittedly passing off track. And after that race in Canada and Monaco, where things happened in those races, but there was a lot of complaints about the officiating and the fact that you couldn't pass and et cetera, et cetera. It seems like the gods that, I don't know, make the fate of Formula One, for whatever reason, fate just turned around and said, fine, you don't want boring races? Let's give you some exciting races. And we've had 4 in a row that have been really damn good. And I would argue that the German Grand Prix this year was the best race of the decade. And I will fight for that.
I I do actually think the second half of the Austrian Grand Prix I will take over Germany.
The battle between Max and Leclerc, the Verstappen Leclerc battle is one we have been waiting for all year long.
But
And
also watching Max charge through the field.
that was also really good. But the 3 laps that those two went at it, we have been waiting for that all year, and it absolutely delivered. Like that had the potential because we've been waiting for 10 races for that to happen, and it delivered. Whereas for the last 5 years, we've been waiting for a Vettel-Hamilton battle, and it really hasn't delivered. There's not been many times those two have actually fought for position on track, and typically when they do, it ends with Vettel going the wrong way on that track. So
I'm
that
gonna make a
battle.
sports reference that Curly's not gonna understand. It's like years of Red Sox Yankees where it was a rivalry, but it really just ended up being the Yankees pushing down the Red Sox. That's what happened with Vettel versus Hamilton. It just ended up with Hamilton.
Clearly, this was a hockey reference here.
It just ended with Hamilton shoving Vettel on his ass and Vettel crying. That's how.
Exactly, but Verstappen and Leclerc for 2 races in a row was the exact opposite of that. You had both of them battling it out on track, and I thought the best part about that was, so you had the Austrian Grand Prix where Leclerc got bumped off track, and there's a lot of discussion about was that a fair move or not, and the FIA said yes, that is a fair move. We're going to allow it. that is okay to drive. And Leclerc in the drivers' meetings even said, this is okay. If I do this, I'm not going to get penalized. And they said, yeah. And he said, okay, I know the terms of engagement and I'm going to use them to my advantage. And that's what he did in the UK. He banged into Max. Max went off track, and Leclerc kept going, and neither of them got a penalty. So, yeah, there were times in all of these races where things kind of settled down. That always happens, but for the most part, they've been really good. I mean, we've had battles for the lead. We've had unpredictability. We had Lewis Hamilton screwing up twice. That doesn't happen. It's rare that he makes a mistake once, much less twice in the same race. And if anything, I actually say it's a testament to his skill that he crashed twice and kept going and still finished the race. And I realized one of them he didn't hit a wall, but he still spun off track, did a full 360, and kept going without hitting anything. That's impressive.
You watching, Vettel?
Yeah, or Leclerc for that matter. I thought the most telling part of is the Leclerc incident where he goes off track at Germany, goes into the gravel, bounces off the barrier, and he gets stuck. And Hamilton, as Leclerc is still sitting in his car, also goes off, bounces off the barrier, but he keeps going. And I think some of that is experience, but I think some of that is also what I call the art of crashing, where you're crashing, you're not going the direction you're supposed to be going anymore, and you save it. You do a full 360. Max Verstappen, by the way, is a driver who knows the art of crashing. He also demonstrated in Germany by doing a full 360 over a curb, airborne, and not hitting anything. He also did it Brazil a couple of years ago when he did that half slide, pointed at the wall, and still kept it off the wall, got the car going straight again, and kept going, and then carved his way through the field. Again, that's the art of crashing. And it's not something you can really practice because, you get into a race car and you don't try to crash it. But some drivers are really good at it, some aren't. And again, Hamilton got into two different situations where he should have crashed, but he didn't, and proved some level of talent because two other drivers that were not Lewis Hamilton had the exact same accident and both ended up in the wall and out of the race. So
Let's be real on this some level of talent thing. Lewis Hamilton is the best overall driver in Formula One, and it's not close.
Absolutely. And it's easy to argue that he is one of the best ever, for differing reasons. I mean, can you put him against an Alberto Ascari or Juan Manuel Fangio or a Michael Schumacher in his prime or an Ayrton Senna?
None of those are fair comparisons, though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say if you put them all in the same car at the same time, I do think Hamilton would come out near the top. I can't say who'd be at the top, but he would be neither. And I only say that because Michael Schumacher would just wreck everybody. He would.
Womp womp.
Yeah, but there's certain driving talents that just carry over outside of putting on a fast lap, and spinning without hitting anything is certainly one of those. And again, I call that the art of crashing. Again, Verstappen's really good at it. Vettel is terrible at it. Leclerc kind of showed he was very good at it.
It's also called straight car control. These guys are really, you can put a fast lap and be half out of control. But to be completely in control like Hamilton, like Verstappen can be, Leclerc sometimes, but that's a special skill, and that's a generational driver talent.
Yeah, that is not something you see. It's not something everybody has, and it's something it's something you can develop, but it's one of those things that most people don't even really talk about because I guess when you're talking about driver coaching, it's easy to sort of just look at, well, if you don't go off, you never have to worry about that. But at some point you will go off, whether it's a tire failure or, a crash in front of you or the weather or whatever it happens to be. At some point you're going to go off, and how you get yourself out of it and recover. And actually, I would even argue that learning how to crash gracefully, if you can call it that, is something Hamilton's actually learned. Because one of his most infamous moments was the Chinese Grand Prix, I think in 2007. He was coming into the pits, and that pit lane, it's a 90-degree left hand onto the main straight, so you go straight and left. And when he made the left in the pit lane, he went into the gravel trap and crashed, doing maybe 80 kilometers an hour. And, he got stuck in the gravel, beached himself, crashed out of the race. He probably could have won the championship if it wasn't for that. And 12 years later, he's clearly learned how to go into a gravel trap and keep going, or spin out completely and keep going. So it is something you can learn. I don't know how he learned it. I don't know if he went to a drifting track and tried to drift, or if he went to a go-kart track and just oiled it down. I don't know what he did, but he did figure out how to manipulate a spinning car. And it's, a lot. Some of what he did was luck, but there's also definite understanding of what is the car doing, understanding, all right, I'm about to crash. How can I, make this the best situation possible for me? So you could actually see when he went off and Leclerc went off in the final turn, Leclerc was completely locked up to the moment he went off track to the moment he got jammed into the barrier. You can actually see Lewis Hamilton let off the brakes and realize, all right, I need to coast, bounce off the wall, and get some momentum so I can keep going. And that is the difference between a absolutely legendary driver and one that's really good. And again, Max Verstappen showed he's got that too. So I think my only regret about the German Grand Prix is that it wasn't a straight Hamilton Verstappen fight, because that's also going to be really good.
But we did get that. Fast forwarding to, what was it, Not
Hungary.
Belgium.
Belgium
Why do
hasn't
I
happened
keep
yet, Tom.
why do I keep mistaking them?
Because Spa is an amazing track. But yeah,
And
we got a bit of that in Hungary, and the only thing I can really say about that is Verstappen is going to take a lot more risk than Hamilton is, because Hamilton's leading the championship. He has to keep his pace and position, and he knows second is better than a DNF. I'm really looking forward to that type of a battle, either at the beginning of the year when, there's everything to play for, or actually, I would even say later this year when Hamilton inevitably locks up the championship and he's got nothing left to lose. The battles between him and Verstappen, I think, are going to be even better. And that's saying something, because the battle between those two in Hungary was already pretty good.
it's telling, the past few races, that the Red Bulls, well, I shouldn't say plural, the Red Bull can punch with Ferrari and can punch with Mercedes on almost any track right now, actually. It's pretty
Yeah.
shocking.
Um, I think the only track where they were kind of hung out to dry was Silverstone. I think that was a track where Ferrari and Mercedes. Well, if anything, that kind of shows. So we've had 4 races, and you've had a different hierarchy in every race. So in Austria, your hierarchy was Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes. Britain was basically Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. Germany was Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull. And then in Hungary, it was Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. So you've had 3 different races where 3 different teams have been really good. And at different points, any of those teams really could have won it. I mean, I think the UK was kind of going to be a Hamilton or a Mercedes race just in general. I think it was going to be difficult for the Ferraris to really, unless it got really hot, it was going to be difficult for Ferrari to really challenge. But again, that opened up a really good Ferrari Red Bull battle, which, you know, came to blows, shall we say. You know, I watched the replay of the Vettel Verstappen incident in Silverstone a bunch of times, and I've gone back and forth with whose fault I thought it was. Because I think on the one hand, I thought Verstappen's defense was really late. On the other hand, locking up all 4 wheels and running into the back of another car is go-kart level mistake. So, but if anything, that was kind of the low point for Vettel, because that was a genuinely, you could sort of explain away some of his other incidents in the last year, but that was pure, rookie move from a 4-time world champion. and then he had Germany, and you could see how much that had lifted him up. You know, he probably should have won that race if he'd actually qualified instead of starting dead last. But the fact that that race went really well for Ferrari. Qualifying sucked, but the race itself went really well for him. I mean, started last, he finished second. I think if he had a couple more laps, he and Verstappen would have battled for the lead. And I
And then
think
he
he
would have
probably could have,
crashed into him.
maybe. But the other half of that was, so Vettel drove a really good race. He was one of the few drivers who never went off, or at least we never saw it. Um, but Ferrari also did a really good job. They brought him in and put him on the right tire every single time. It was the race where Ferrari and Vettel were actually performing at pretty close to their peak. And you've had races where Ferrari haven't delivered and Vettel tries too hard and crashes, or Ferrari deliver and Vettel isn't delivering, or neither of them deliver and they end up doing something terrible. But this is the one race, and I would say the last year, where both Vettel and Ferrari were really performing together. And to me, that's a huge turning point. And I think it kind of boiled over into Hungary. I mean, he finished third in a race where Ferrari was nowhere. So I really think that's going to be a turning point for Vettel's season. Finally, it throws the monkey off his back of last year's German race, where he admittedly screwed up pretty bad.
It's a confidence booster. We'll see if he can deliver on it, though. His his confidence tends to waver pretty quickly. So if he doesn't, he needs to come out in
He needs a win.
Belgium, which is next and not already happened. He needs to
He
come
needs to
out
win
in
in Belgium.
Belgium. He needs to come out of Belgium, and he needs a good race.
He needs a win. I think if anything, he really needs a win, because he hasn't won. Well, he hasn't won a race since Belgium of last year. So he's gotten to the, okay, I can still drive, I can still push hard and not wreck or spin or hit somebody. I can battle with other people and not wreck. But now he needs the win to close that out. And I agree. He's not 100% there, but he's on an upswing, and he just needs to keep it going. And I think more importantly, he needs to figure out how to prevent that kind of valley from happening again. Because Hamilton, everybody has an off day, no matter what you do. Hamilton has his off days, but he has figured out, when he's having a bad day, how to make the best of it. And actually, one of those days was Germany. He was really sick, to the point where Mercedes was ready to put Esteban Ocon in the car and have him start the race from pit lane, because Lewis Hamilton was actually really sick, and he still finished in the points barely. So, if it had been Vettel, he probably wouldn't have started that race if he was feeling really sick and gross. But Hamilton did, and he still had a decent. At one point he was leading the race, and if the weather hadn't completely thrown Mercedes for a loop, he probably could have won that race. So, and actually that was kind of the interesting dichotomy. So Ferrari on the one side was performing really well, and Germany was also a rare race where Mercedes looked like they had no idea what they were doing, because Ferrari made all their calls perfectly. Mercedes did exactly the opposite.
Everybody gets one, but
Exactly.
other places in the field showing massive improvement and finally getting confidence boosters.
Williams.
No one cares.
Hold on. No.
Your other
I just
sad
want to
favorite
spend a
team.
couple of seconds. Williams. So Tom, you'll remember I sent you an IM because you were basically boarding your plane to London, if I remember correctly, and I said I think George Russell will score his first point in a Williams. That was my what did we call it?
Bold
That was my
prediction.
hot take for the race. What was
Bold
that?
prediction. Bold
Yeah.
prediction.
That was my bold prediction. And I was close, because it was actually Kubica.
And my response was, who was that again?
The Polish dude. It's not in here, but I have a painting of him on my wall crashing.
I was talking about George Russell. I had no idea who he was.
Do you also know who Kubica is, though?
I did know who he was. I knew who he drove for, but I had no idea who George Russell is. I'm still not entirely sure.
Yeah, well, he's a Mercedes driver actually, but Williams, he's a Mercedes factory driver who's driving for Williams because Mercedes has more drivers than they know what to do with. But I was close. A Williams driver finished in the points. And actually, I know we're about to talk about McLaren, but I do want to say Williams is actually, they're not good, but that is another team that has stopped the downslide. And again, Germany was a very lucky race that they got a single point, but George Russell almost made it out of Q1. He was 16th. And considering that Russell and Kubica have been 19th and 20th consistently through the first half of the year, the fact that one of them was 16th, just not dead last, was a huge improvement. So good for Williams. But you're right. Only weird people like me care about Williams. So let's talk about a more interesting team like McLaren.
It's getting a little bit better. More people care about them, including you.
How about Haas? Let's talk about Haas for a second. Or I can see the depression in your face.
This isn't water anymore.
It's magically turned to vodka. Yeah, poor Haas. All right, so here's the question for you, Mr. Haas fan. Which of those drivers is not returning next year, and who's being replaced? And who is the replacement?
For the love of God, I hope it's Grosjean. I really, really hope he's gone.
I kind of agree.
He
I thought he had turned a corner when he first went to Haas, but
the
he's
amount of
kind of turned around and gone back on that corner like 3 times.
the amount of bonehead moves he makes is unbelievable.
I'll be fair to Grosjean slightly. His teammate also makes some bonehead moves, and the problem is they both make bonehead moves with each other, which makes them equally bad. I mean, the number of times those two have run into each other this year is inexcusable.
That's fair, but I really do think a lot of that is driven by Grosjean. He's always been a guy with a chip on his shoulder, and it's getting worse. He hasn't had that Vettel moment of turning it around. Even when he does have a decent race, he can't he can't get that chip off his back, and I don't think he's ever going to with the Haas. The Haas is not fast enough for him to win a race and magically get better. He's got to go. He's got to, for both his sake and the team's.
I want to defend Grosjean because I saw him in his rookie year. He was bad. I mean, we talk about there's the whole penalty point system, which was instituted because of Romain Grosjean, who caused an accident so bad at your favorite track, Belgium, that he actually got a 1 race ban. He literally ran over Lewis Hamilton, and he actually took out Hamilton and Alonso in a accident that actually probably would have stopped. If that accident hadn't happened, I think Fernando Alonso would have probably won the championship that year, not Vettel. But Grosjean ran over a bunch of cars. He got banned for 1 race for being a moron. And actually, after that, he calmed down, but he's sort of inched back towards that sort of rookie moment. And you're right, he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder. At one point, he was a Ferrari junior driver. He's not anymore. Actually, at one point, he was supposed to be the person who was going to sort of take over the team from Alonso and Kimi. That hasn't come about, and it's never going to happen. And I think at this point, the best thing he could do is, I don't want to say retire, but step aside from the driving side of Formula One. He's the head of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, which is basically the drivers' union. He should focus on that and focus on being a representative for the drivers and not just a driver. But then again, the question is going to be who should replace him.
It's an interesting question. Gasly might be available after this season.
I doubt that. I know he's not had a good season, but I don't think Red Bull is ready to let him go yet.
We'll see.
Yet is
But
the key word there.
there's an old Spaniard that might be a decent fit.
I was going to say the obvious answer is Alonso.
I'm not sure I want Alonso back on in F1 and especially for Haas, but I do
I,
think it might be good for the team to have an experienced driver like that. I really do think they need someone with experience.
it absolutely would be someone with good experience because Grosjean's been a lot. It's his seventh season, but I don't know where he's at as a technical driver. I don't think Magnussen is a very technical driver. Um, yeah, I don't think Alonso would have Haas. They're just not good enough, and they just don't really have a game plan to get good enough. So, also, on the other hand, the exchanges between Fernando Alonso and Gunther Steiner would be radio gold. You have two hard-headed a-holes going at it over the radio. I would almost see at one point Alonso just parking the car, telling Gunther to F off, and then just walking away and going to get suntanned again. I mean,
That's why I was very conflicted about that answer. I'm not sure I want to see Alonso on in Haas.
you know what the obvious answer is? Just drag Felipe Massa out of retirement again.
Please no. Let the man live.
He's in Formula E and he's actually starting to do pretty good. He struggled at the beginning of the season, but he's started to get better. Let's see who else. I'm kind of trying to seriously think about this. Who would replace Roman Grosjean?
The fact that we have to think this hard is kind of sad.
And I think that anyone who's about to comment on this is going to say Alexander Rossi. And yes, I would love that, but it's not happening.
He's perfectly happy where he is.
More than fighting for a championship. It's not something he's ever going to do in a Haas, even though, American driver and an American car would kind of make sense. Maybe, depending on what happens with Mercedes, I could see Esteban Ocon because Mercedes has said, Mercedes doesn't want to keep sitting him around for another year. But if they're not going to replace Bottas with him, they've actually said that they are open to letting him drive for a rival manufacturer. So maybe I could see Ocon maybe being allowed to race for Haas for a year.
Sure, but I'm not sure that's the experience they're
Uh,
desperately needing.
Ocon's pretty good. Yeah, it's kind of weird. There's not really a huge pool of ready and waiting drivers you could sort of slot in there. That is kind of interesting. Well, McLaren's doing really good, so we can talk about McLaren. 2 fifths in a row. Lando Norris has not delivered either of those fifth places, but he's also had some extenuating circumstances for not finishing as well. So, for example, in I think it was Hungary, one of those last races, McLaren. Oh, it was Hungary. Um, he was on place. It should have been a fifth and a sixth for McLaren, but it was a fifth and a seventh, and that was because they had a wheel gun fail in the pit stop. Totally not Lando Norris's fault, but it still screwed him. So yeah, McLaren's really improved themselves. They kind of turned themselves around, and I actually have to say, I think a decent portion of that is because they no longer have a certain Spaniard on the team.
That's certainly a big help when that guy's not trashing your team every week. It's a lot more stability.
Definitely. Yeah, he's not trashing the team. He's not. See, the thing that I think Norris and Sainz have together is that they're willing to work together for the better of the team. Because I guess they sort of realize that if the team is performing better, they both perform better as individuals. Whereas Alonso, he is very cutthroat. The team is built around him. The cars are built around him. You share your data with him, but he will not share it in return. And I think that is detrimental to a team. And I think that's one of the reasons that they couldn't move forward is that he wanted to move forward, but he didn't want the team to necessarily move forward. So if there was a chance that Stoffel Van Dorn or Jensen Button were going to end up doing better than him, he wouldn't have it. So um, and I think Sainz and Norris both realize. Well, I think number one, they don't care as much either. Well, Norris clearly doesn't because he's a rookie. He's just sort of he's still in the honeymoon period where he's happy to be in F1. Um, I think Sainz is at the point in his career where he realizes he just needs to be putting in those good results, and the only way to do that is to have a decent car under you, and the only way to do that is to use both of those cars to your best advantage. And I think the two of them together, and it's obviously it's not just the drivers, it's the teams underneath them, but it all sort of trickles down. If you have two good drivers who are both pushing in the same direction, everybody else will start to follow, and I think that's what's really happening. And it's been great to see. I am super happy. Like, I really thought this was going to be the year that Renault would start inching up and maybe poking their nose into this top end battle, but it's starting to become McLaren, and I didn't expect that, but it makes me really happy because I like McLaren. I like their awesome orange papaya cars. And speaking of awesome orange papaya cars, segue time finally. McLaren has announced they're coming back to IndyCar full time. God, I hope it goes better than the Indy 500. But you know what? It will, because
Not much
almost
more to it.
anything could have gone better than this year's Indy 500 for McLaren. That was literally Murphy's Law in action. I think the only thing that could have gone worse for them is if they'd gotten the car right and the engine blew.
So, Curly, tell us a little bit about this deal because it's not quite as simple as McLaren returning to Formula One or returning to IndyCar now, is it? To drive at the Belgian Grand Prix.
Clearly, it's starting to get late. We'll try to make this one kind of quick. So really, it's basically a sponsorship exercise, which is a little bit disappointing for me. So McLaren they're essentially sponsoring the current Schmidt Peterson Motorsport team, owned by Sam Schmidt, wonderful driver who was injured in a very tragic testing accident.
You mean Sam Smith, singer-songwriter?
No. So Schmidt Peterson's been around for a while. Their biggest calling card has been James Hinchcliffe for the last few years. He's won races for them. He has been the biggest draw for sponsors. And this year and also last year they brought in Robert Wickens, Hinchcliffe's good friend, who sadly was badly injured in an accident almost a year ago at Pocono. And now they've got Marcus Ericsson, who's also performing pretty well. He's had some good finishes this year. But McLaren is buying into that team, and they're not buying. They're basically sponsoring the team. It's money, and here's a few engineers from our Formula One side that we can spare for IndyCar. It's rebranding the team. They're not going to be black and gold. They're going to be papaya and blue, which awesome paint scheme. But to me, that's kind of disappointing because McLaren has already said many times they were not going to go in as a brand new team all on their own. And I think in IndyCar that would have been suicide. But they also said they wanted a partnership, but I really expect them to have a partnership like they had with Andretti or with Carlin, where it was a McLaren team and they were basically teammates to another team. And I guess in some ways this is kind of like the Andretti deal where it was technically an Andretti car, but McLaren sponsored, except now it's two cars and we don't quite know who's going to be in them yet.
No, we don't. But it's really good for Schmidt Peterson Racing.
Yes.
Yay! No, it's Schmidt Peterson Motorsport.
SPM, yep. Close enough. I'll take racing.
All
At
right,
least you,
I did the thing. I did an IndyCar thing, but no,
I'm
it's
still
really
getting Tom up to speed on IndyCar, by the way.
it's failing badly, but it's a good thing to fund a lot of money and a lot of resources not a fair amount into a smaller team, but still successful. They're kind of a fringe team from anything I've seen.
They are, well, to be honest, they're Schmidt Peterson to IndyCar is kind of like McLaren to F1 right now, where they can stick their nose up there. Occasionally they're leading races, occasionally they're competitive. And already I'm realizing this is not a great metaphor because even
No, this is not going well.
well, the point is SPM, they're kind of a midfield team, but they do. I mean, Hinchcliffe has won races with them. They've performed well on occasion, but they don't perform well consistently. It's one of those teams where most of the time they're nowhere, and then all of a sudden they pop up at the front of the field like, oh, where did Hinch come from? Or where did Ericsson come from? Or, last year Wickens. Um, and I am hoping that McLaren's resources will push them to be more competitive with Penske, Ganassi, and Andretti. By the way, it is kind of interesting how all three of those teams are owned by former drivers. And actually, the only one who never raced at Indianapolis was Roger Penske, but he was a racer.
Fun facts, everyone. The more
Fun
you know.
facts, yes, yes, yeah. All three of them were drivers. Actually, something most people don't know: Chip Ganassi was an IndyCar driver, and he only retired because he was in a really bad accident. Basically retired because of his accident. Very scary one, actually. It's amazing he lived. And he bought a team, and he's been really successful with it. So yeah, that's a fun fact. A lot of people really don't know because that was over 30 years ago. But anyway, going back to current IndyCar, um, you know, Penske, Ganassi, and Andretti are pretty evenly matched. You go to any of the races today, and all three of those cars are going to be in the top six, at least one of them. And it'll be good to have, hopefully, a consistent fourth team that can, bloody those noses. So, you're right. It should bring some more parity to the field. Yeah, fingers crossed, definitely. It should bring some just sort of help elevate this. Where obviously the marketing behind McLaren is huge. The fact that McLaren Racing is back in IndyCar, and in a sport that has admittedly struggled over the last 20 years to find those big positive headlines, that's nothing but good. I wish it would have increased the car count, but McLaren's back in IndyCar. I can't be upset with that. It gives me a new team to root for that's not just Penske. So
Ask NASCAR how too high of a car count goes. You don't need that much more. I think IndyCar is fine where it is, to be perfectly
I
honest.
so they've got 20
Not
to
to start you on a new
24.
tangent here.
Well, no, I think this is actually a good one. So you're right. Too many cars is a problem, and well, the ultimate example of that is Las Vegas 2011, where there were too many Indy cars on the track, and one of those drivers didn't walk away. So you're right. That is a problem. But that particular race had, I think, 30 cars or so. IndyCar right now has, depending on the weekend, 22 to 26 cars. And I would say only 22 of them are full time. So if you go from 22 to 24, I think that's fine. I think when you start getting to like the 28 mark, that's too many cars for IndyCar. So I think they could have handled two more, but more than that, probably not. So
I just don't think with fast open wheel cars, I think this is the much better strategy for McLaren. They don't need to start a new team. No one they don't need to stretch themselves like that. Going with an already established team, sponsoring them, adding a bit of resources, that is the perfect way for them to bring their inclusion in. Because if they make a brand new car, they're going to be bad. They're not going to win races. They might win races with SPM. They might. They
oh,
probably
they
will.
definitely will. They definitely will. It may not be immediate, but at some point they will. And the thing about IndyCar is they do have telemetry and data, but it's nowhere near as intense as what they've got in Formula One. But more to the point, they can't, a Formula One car, that car is set up to be perfect around every single corner because they have the ability to. And actually, there's a really good interview by Marcus Ericsson earlier this year when he was first testing Indy cars, and he said, when we're setting up the Saubers, even the Saubers from last year, which were terrible, he said, we'll tweak the brake bias, we'll tweak the differential, and we'll get that car to handle really well and consistent out of every single corner on the track. He said, but IndyCar, you don't have that freedom. You have to decide, all right, we're going to be good in turns 3, 5, and 10, but we're going to give up some time in 1, 4, and 6. And, in IndyCar, you can't develop the entire car. You can develop the dampers and you can play with the setup options that Dallara gives you. And that makes it a whole lot more difficult. You have to get the car right. You have to get the driver comfortable with the car. And the only way to really do that is to get data. And the only way to get data is to have more cars on the track. So, one of the reasons that Penske and Andretti are so good is because they have 3 or 4 cars on track at any given time. Whereas, the smaller teams only have 1 or 2, and that extra data is where you say, all right, we're going to do one change on this car, one change on the other car, and a third change on the third car. But if you've only got 1 or 2 cars, you can't do that. So, in that sense, yes, buying into an established team that already has those resources and that data and that knowledge is important, because even though they don't have as much data as Formula One, the data you have is incredibly important. And again, McLaren said they were not going to start a standalone team. Again, I just wish it was sort of like I guess the example I'd give is Meyer Shank Racing, which races Jack Harvey. They are also partnered with SPM. It is a separate team from SPM, but they do work together. They are teammates. So I guess that's kind of what I was expecting, where it was more, okay, it's McLaren Racing. They're their own entity, but they are working with an established team for the benefit of both of those teams. That's what I would have preferred. But again, we have McLaren back in an IndyCar. It's like the Corvette C8. It may not be exactly what I want, but it's there. So I'm going to be happy about it.
Curly's never completely happy, ladies and gentlemen.
No, no. No, I'm not going to be happy until there's a Suzuki Cappuccino Racing League. It just needs to happen. So we've gone through McLaren. We've circled back to the Corvette C8. Both of us have work in the morning. I think we need to call it a night. And with the technical difficulties, this show has dragged on even longer than expected. So thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. Thank you for listening to our rants. And this has been the end of the episode of Slant 6. None of that came out right. It's time to go to bed. We'll be back in a week, earlier in the day, and hopefully it'll be a little more coherent than it was right now. Good night, everybody.
Entschuldigung and guten Nacht.